What's going on, digital wildcatters? Welcome to another week of Big Digital Energy. I'm here with my co-host Chuck. Chuck, what's going on, my man?
I'm still pissed off about the Cowboy game yesterday.
You know
That
what?
was miserable.
I haven't watched a single down of football since Tony Romo retired, and seeing all the tweets online about disappointment of the Dallas Cowboys reminded me of how nice my life is now that I don't have to correlate my happiness with Dallas Cowboys success. So I have sympathy for you, but I'm also happy that I'm not in your shoes.
It is amazing you make a decision when you're 7 years old and it affects your life until you're 53.
Right. All right, so we got a lot of news and energy this week. Let's get into our first story here. All right, we had some mineral mergers mania. I'll let Chuck come up with the titles for the stories. He's been on point so far. It's always good.
And by the way, to the audience, we used to not be able to see or hear the videos, but Tim's fixed it up so when we're in here, we can hear the music. Gets me going. I kind of like it.
So this week, Desert Peak Minerals and Falcon Minerals, in an almost $2 billion deal, combine the companies. They'll own more than 139,000 net royalty acres and expected production of 14,000 barrels of oil per day. Desert Peak will own 73%. Falcon will own 27%. I thought this was a pretty interesting deal, Chuck. I know that you have some thoughts and opinions on it. What does it mean in the grand scheme of things?
Well, it's interesting because let's step back. So Desert Peak, backed by Kimmeridge, files to go public. They do the whole road show. I've heard, the range on the cover of the S1 was 20 to 23. I heard the bankers had actually recommended like 16 to 18 or 17 to 19. So anyway, they go out, they do the full road show. They have the pricing meeting for the IPO. And this is the phone call where basically at the close of business one day, and they're like 10-minute calls, right? Hey, we have a book together at X price, there's a little bit of haggling back and forth, but at the end of the day, you agree to the price and boom, your IPO happens. Well, I heard the way this pricing call went down is UBS came in and said, we've got a book together, can do it at $19 a share. Sorry, it's below the range, but, we kind of told you it was going to be 17 to 19. And Kimmeridge said no. And tempers flared is what I heard, maybe the nice way to put it. And so anyway, so the IPO didn't get done. That was kind of the first part of November of last year. So to some degree, Desert Peak has been going, what do I do next? They had levered up a little bit into the IPO. So it's not like they could just cruise on autopilot for a while. And so, Falcon Minerals had run off their CEO and had replaced the CEO this summer with the CFO. So Brian Gunderson, who I've never met, CEO tenure of 6 months. So come on, Chuck Yates needs a job. We can talk about Brian needing a job too. we'll do that. But this was really kind of maybe we call it the save face marriage, if you will, instead of a shotgun marriage.
Shotgun wedding segment.
Yeah,
that would have been a perfect.
No, it really was. So
ultimately, Desert Peak, they wanted a higher price. They thought that they had a higher market cap valuation than what the market actually demanded, and they weren't really particularly thrilled about that and had to figure out what their next move was. And
so they wind up becoming public, because Falcon was a publicly traded company. I haven't worked through all the math yet to know whether they got that higher valuation, but I think what the market told them on the road show was, hey, why do we need another Permian minerals company? We've got Viper, et cetera, Brigham, et cetera, out there. And then number two, they also said, your growth rates that you're touting, whether that was, 25, 30%, just way too high. I mean, the whole Permian basin's not going to grow that much. And so the valuation was.
What do you think about that? I mean, with us coming off the bottom and energy stocks just ripping, I mean, do you think that's a fair assessment? I mean, back in November and in the fall of 2021, I guess that could have been true. But Do you think that that's the case now?
Well, valuation ripped, but at the end of the day, minerals are guided by activity, right? And so the rig rate's been steadily rising, but it has not gone crazy rising. And
Yep.
so your growth is actually pretty easy to predict because it's all right, how many rigs you got running on your acreage, and people can figure that out from public information. So every time I have done anything market related, in hindsight, the market was always right and I was always wrong. But, to their credit, Kimmeridge got a deal done. They've got a publicly traded stock. It's actually got more scale. It's bigger. So, maybe this was step 1 and 2. They were going to go public. They were going to merge with someone. So they did it all at once.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's go over to tech because we got some interesting things happening in the tech industry this week.
By the way, I really like the song on this video, so get ready to dance.
My face over Steve Ballmer's body is just something I don't aspire to become.
And dancing.
Yeah, and dancing. We may be on par for dancing, but
so Collin, we have Microsoft buying Activision for almost $70 billion. This adds Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, and Candy Crush to Xbox and Minecraft and Doom. And it's going to make Microsoft the 3rd largest gaming company behind China's Tencent Holdings and Japan's Sony Group. This is kind of wild.
Yeah, it's really wild. And there's a way that we tie this back to the energy industry here in a few minutes. But I wanted to get some stats on Microsoft's acquisitions historically. So they acquired LinkedIn for $26 billion, Nuance Communications for $20 billion, GitHub for $7.5 billion, ZeniMax for $7.5 billion, and now Activision, $70 billion, all cash. So Microsoft has just been going on a rampage of acquisitions over, call it the last decade or so. And, the way that this really plays into energy is we have a race going on for the metaverse. And so you have Facebook, formerly Facebook, now known as Meta, and their push into the metaverse. And, I was telling you, Chuck, before this show, we bought my kid a Oculus for Christmas, and the technology has come such a long ways, and it's unbelievable. And so now you start to see Microsoft starting to bolster up their platform for the metaverse, which gaming is a huge component of that. And so it makes perfect sense that they're acquiring Activision. What I think is interesting, though, is, you always hear all of these complaints on Bitcoin mining and its energy usage, but no one ever questions the energy usage of the Xbox Live network. And you can go look up the stats. I mean, Xbox, when they're in standby mode, they consume a ton of electricity and power. And the metaverse is only going to 10x that, right? It's just crazy. I'm playing ping pong with little Frack Slap out there. Give him a shout out, make him feel good. But we're playing ping pong, and it's crazy how it feels like a real game of ping pong. And you just think about, the bandwidth and latency that goes into that, and to have like a real physical game of ping pong. And now you start extrapolating that. You think 10, 15, 20 years from now, like Call of Duty made by Activision, if we're playing that in the metaverse and like it's a real first person shooter game, and, you're running around and like, you're physically doing the things, think about how much energy that's going to consume and take, and it's only going to add to demand, which, all of these forecasts that we have for energy demand, like they don't take shit like that into consideration.
So let's look out 15 years. Is going to Tahiti, being on the boat, cruising around the islands in the metaverse, does it replace that with people, or is it additive?
No, anyone that thinks that metaverse replaces real life human experiences, there's a lot of people that think that, but that's not how it is. Web3 is digital and in real life elements combined. But like I'll tell you, like there's this one setting in the Oculus, it's fucking amazing. Like you go out there and it's like a cliff and it's got like beach views and sunset and there's a couch there. And I'm like, man, that couch looks really comfortable. Like I wish I could sit on that. And I can't go sit on it obviously, but that's how real the settings seem, that it's like a good experience. So it's an addition. It's not like, the metaverse is going to replace real life. Like that's foolish to think that, that's possible, but it's a real thing, and meetings are going to happen there, with the rise of remote work. I mean, it's already happening. Like, why would I not, if I have Tim over here and we're in 2 different states, why would we not hop on a game of ping pong and sit there and brainstorm and talk to each other over a game of ping pong? Just like we do, we have a real ping pong table over there in the office, and you can replicate that in the metaverse. So I'm bullish on it. And I think that you're going to keep seeing acquisitions like this, but with every acquisition like this and every ounce of effort that goes towards the metaverse, it has to be powered somehow. And it's just going to keep increasing energy demand. So I think that that's really, something to look at for the energy industry. And when you're looking at projections of the energy demand and the energy mix that powers that, like this has to be taken into consideration.
You are correct. It's going to be additive as opposed to replacing. Agree with you that. And I don't mean to get all racy here for just a second, but truly, we've talked about this on the podcast before. There was a great First Boston research report in the late 90s that talked about a lot of technologies driven by sex. I mean, a lot of the reason why we have VHS beating out Betamax is because the porn industry adopted VHS. And so being able to get porn cheaper and without having to go into a store, et cetera, has driven a lot of this. You're reading articles now in mainstream publications that talk about sexual experiences in the metaverse, and that's only going to drive more demand.
Yeah, I had this funny comment as well from Twitter that I wanted to read out. So if you didn't know, Activision was currently going through some sexual assault accusations within the company. I think they ended up firing around 30 people that were tied to that. And I saw this parody comment on Twitter that said, at Sony, we wanted to make a very strong and principled stance against employee harassment, which is why 30 minutes ago we decided to never work with Activision Blizzard again. And I thought this was funny because it brought up a really good point of, Microsoft, obviously a competitor to Sony and PlayStation. And now, Sony PlayStation has these games that are produced by Activision that are really popular on their console and their platform. And now it's owned by their competitor. So how do you treat those things? But anyways, I thought that comment was really funny. And then one thing I wanted to share too on this topic of energy consumption and powering servers and Bitcoin was that Antminer, this is my nerd coming out here, but Bitmain, Antminer, S19, Hydro came out. And so if you look here, this is an S19 Bitcoin miner, and it is water cooled. And this thing is an absolute monster, surpasses its predecessor by 41%, does 198 terahash per second, which is just wild. And the reason that this is important in terms of energy is because if you look at, you made a comment earlier about, wherever we drill for oil and gas, it's usually really hot. It's either really hot or really cold. It's extreme conditions.
It's never a garden site.
You don't drill for oil in places that are nice and beautiful. But out in West Texas, the challenge with Bitcoin mining has always been, how do you cool it? And you have 2 options. You have air cooling or you have liquid immersion cooling. Liquid immersion cooling is expensive. It's complex. Air cooling usually does the job, but out in West Texas, you have problems with dust and things of that nature. And so with Antminer's S19 hydros coming out where they can be water cooled, that can solve the problem of being able to mine out in these extreme temperature environments that you usually see in the oil fields. So
yeah, I mean, just run along the equator, every place we have oil and gas and stranded natural gas. You're right. I mean, it's hot as all get out. Libya, tick on down the list, all the Middle East.
Anywhere, man. There's nowhere nice. So speaking of hot, energy's on fire. Let's get into that story.
Look what I have created! I have made fire!
Jesus, that face.
Your
was
face on
terrible.
Tom Hanks. I love that.
So what we've seen over the last couple of weeks is really capital flows flowing from tech to energy. And I saw a tweet that said no one's going to be more insufferable than energy bulls. And I'm like, hey, I think we kind of deserved it over the last decade or so. But let's take a look at what we have. XOP's up 16% year to date. Crude's up 18%. Hedge funds have gone long. 500,000 contracts on crude equates to equates. I'm making up my own words here. Equates to 500 million barrels. So overall, you're seeing a lot of bullish sentiment, and it's so funny because if you go back, 2 months ago, it's Biden releasing oil from the SPR, from Omicron coming in and crushing demand. Everyone's getting a little bearish, and now we're just ripping off the bottom. What do you think? What do you think?
Two things on this. One, all that releasing the SPR, Omicron, and stuff that kind of led to some flattish type performance November and December, that was tax selling. That was hedge funds locking in their gains as well, because energy had just been on fire last year. So it's like November, you sell, you lock in the gains, you actually pay carry, because no one's paid carry in energy for 10 or 11 years.
Yeah.
And then what happens the day after the new year starts? You buy back in. So that's one thing going on. I hate to do this because I'm not one to usually do this, but I got to admit when I'm wrong. I'm never in doubt, but I may have been wrong on this, because last week we were talking about this, and I said at 2.5% of the S&P 500, we don't matter. So capital's not coming back, right?
Yes.
That's kind of what I said. I said, great, stocks have done well. When Pickering was on the podcast in kind of the middle of last year, he said, hey, stock prices go up. That's how you attract investors back. I'm like, nah, Dan, there's not going to be any volume to that. Here's what I heard last week that I think makes a lot of sense to me. Yes, we are 2.5% of the S&P 500. If you look at a value index, so not a tech guy, but more a value investor, you see that we're kind of 7 to 8% of that. And I was talking to a well-regarded research analyst last week who says he's been getting, for the last, call it, month, a lot of phone calls from generalist type investors talking about energy and the like. And we're seeing this just massive movement from technology into value investing. So if you make that step, we're no longer 2.5% of the S&P 500. We're more 7 or 8%. And then a lot of the value investors that this guy's talking to, because capital discipline, low multiples, paying a distribution, they're pushing energy to kind of 10, 11% of their portfolios. When we're 10 and 11% of portfolios, we matter. So people have to come in and buy. You'll see it start with Pioneer and Diamondback and the large guys. You'll see, and that's why those multiples are higher today. You'll see it trickle down into the mid cap and the small cap. And the question will be one of two things. Is it a trade that once the valuations come up, value investors rip the Band-Aid and leave energy? Or does the demand stay so great that folks can actually do equity offerings? So that's going to be the interesting thing to see. And that's actually a believable pathway for the industry getting capital back that I didn't appreciate as late as a week ago.
Yeah, it's funny how fast things can change, right? I want to read this comment real quick from GW Goldman. He's adding some insight here, but he said Virgins Unite should be the name for this show. And
I had it posted up there for a while while you were talking all during.
Yeah, I posted it too while you were talking. I thought it was a good comment.
I think that is
maybe next week we'll introduce the show, or not next week because we may have Mark substitute in for you. But next week when you're back, we'll rename the show Virgins Unite. So what's our next story to get us rounded up?
Next story. Let's do this.
Martin Luther King with rock backdrop is pretty hardcore. I like that.
I liked it too. Well, and it's a serious point I want to make right here. And Tim's sitting in the back going, I'm so glad you didn't reface your face or Collin's face on Martin Luther King. And I agree wholeheartedly. But no, I talked about this yesterday. Yesterday was obviously MLK Day. I talked about this on social media. I think every American ought to read Letter from a Birmingham Jail. And you can read it for yourself. It's an amazing piece of work. I mean, just in the context of the 60s, the civil rights movement, it speaks for itself. So I'm not going to opine on that. The thing I found really interesting is the backdrop of the story. He's in jail in Birmingham, and he writes this letter literally in the margin of newspapers because that's the only paper he has. He's not given pen and paper. So he scratches it out. He's sneaking it out every chance he gets to talk to his lawyer. Finally, they allow him a legal pad and a pen, and he finishes the letter. But back at kind of his headquarters, they're having to piece this together because it's smuggled out in little bits. And I mean, just can you fathom today not being able to write a letter in jail and give it to somebody? But that's what he was going through.
That's crazy. I've never heard of that, so I'll have to pick that up and read it.
So anyway, but that's the take for everybody out there watching that. It's 6 pages. Go read Letter from a Birmingham Jail. It's really really pretty amazing.
That's awesome. I hate how we always follow up our last segment, Finger of the Week, after something that's important issue and sentimental. Let's talk about MLK now. Finger of the Week. Let's get into it. All right, the whole Northeast getting Finger of the Week. I was going to single out a couple politicians. Chuck said no. The entire Northeast is giving the Finger of the Week. So let's talk about why they're getting the Finger of the Week. There's this lady on Twitter who I've followed, and I really like her. Her name is slipping my mind right now, but she wrote this book called, I believe it's called Shorting the Grid. And she's been sitting there posting these screenshots of the energy mix of the Northeast as they come into some cold weather here. And renewables have just absolutely disappeared. The other day she posted a screenshot. Solar was accounting for, less than 1%. Waste natural gas was at 2%. And then just using a ton of heating oil, burning wood, and all these comments that I was seeing in the comment section from really, there was kind of a big audience that was non-energy. So people are like, why is there an energy crunch when you have the Marcellus 100 miles away, 200 miles away? And this goes back to, some of our previous episodes where we're talking about the resistance to building pipelines to secure energy for the New England area. I mean, it's just absurd, right? It's absurd that we're having to import LNG from other countries. It's absurd that we're having to burn wood, which, by the way, the biggest scam right now is how they put the burning of wood and waste natural gas. They mark that up as renewables. It just to bolster up their numbers. Yeah, as biomass or biofuels. And it's just the biggest fucking scam that there is. But yeah, I think that people up in the Northeast are kind of having a rude awakening of what their energy mix is looking like and what happens when you don't think about energy policy in a pragmatic manner.
Well, and it's not just what their mix is, it's what the cost is too. I mean, if you had natural gas pipelines hooked up to the Northeast, it'd be a lot cheaper than out there burning fuel oil.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's more efficient, it's cleaner burning, all that. So
hopefully politicians and people up in the Northeast wake up soon and understand the problems that we have before it gets worse.
It's interesting this week on the...
I'm not hopeful. That's why I laughed.
Exactly. This week on the podcast that I'll drop tomorrow, I had Will Franklin on. He's with Lime Rock Partners, and he's actually running for the state house in Texas. And one of the things we talked about was there is not a person in Congress that is actually of an energy background. So Congress in Washington, D.C. is sitting there making decisions about energy, and no one is sitting at the table that has an energy background to say, hey, guys, reliability actually matters. Or, hey, guys, do we really want to burn wood? Because that's a pretty big carcinogenic.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at large scale in DC, but even if you scale down to Texas, there's not a lot of Texas politicians that have backgrounds in energy. I mean, even go look at the Railroad Commission, governs policy on oil and gas. Or you look at ERCOT, there's not a lot of energy backgrounds within those two organizations. So, I think that's a problem.
Kudos to Will for being able to actually taking the step to try to join the arena. So we've got at least one voice there. He makes one other really good point of the podcast, and it's a good listen, is you need to have an energy person at the table helping that, as well as an energy person who has connections in energy who can bring in information to help make the decision. Because you don't know everything about energy. I don't know everything about energy, but we've got a network where if we were sitting at the table and somebody started talking about fuel oil burning, we'd know an expert to go bring into the discussion. And that's totally missing.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in to this week's show. We'll be back next week. I don't think Chuck's going to be here. Fortunately, we'll have a great replacement. We're going to keep it a surprise. But we'll be here 10:30 Tuesday. Make sure you subscribe to the newsletter if you haven't done that. Make sure you subscribe to our other podcasts too. Oil and Gas Startups. Chuck Yates Needs a Job. Go leave us a review, both on those shows and this show.